Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this walkthrough of FloodZone, the exhibition by Anastasia Samoylova and with the artist Anastasia Samoylova. I'm Sabrina Amrani, and we are in one of our galleries in downtown Madrid. And it's the first time that we are presenting a solo exhibition by Anastasia, and it's her first solo show, in fact, in Spain. So we are very thrilled about it. Hi, Anastasia, are you with us?
I am. Hi. Hi.
Nice to see you, virtually.
Oh, yes, I can't believe we're doing it. Look at us. All the way from my
So I'm going to give some tips for the audience, for the people that are joining us, and then we go straight to the chest and we go into this exhibition. So first of all, this walkthrough is recorded and it's on our website, or you are viewing it on Facebook Live, or you are viewing it on YouTube Live. So the conversation, it will be literally a walkthrough and conversation with Anastasia, where she will give us some insight about her practice, about the photographs, the pieces of the exhibition. And we will reserve a moment at the end of the conversation for questions and answers. So if you have questions, drop them into the comment zone of Facebook as a comment, and we will see them, or in YouTube if you are watching through YouTube. So Anastasia, let's go. So I'm super happy to have your exhibition, but I have to say just one little anecdote before we start, because we met through a common friend, chief curator of the USF Museum in Tampa, in United States, Christian Viveros Faune, and I'm so thankful to him that he invited you to join one of the group exhibitions he curated for us. So I wanted just to put this note and thank him a lot. And now let's go. So please, my first question is that you are a photographer, Russian American, but tell us more about you. What did you study and where did you study?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so excited to be showing in Madrid. And on a year like this, actually, it feels quite relevant, I think, to have this show, right? With what we're dealing with right now with this pandemic, right? In the middle of it. Of course, it's a pain that I can't be there and see the exhibition. It is just much disdain. But speaking of zoonotic diseases, right? Pandemic and climate change, all of these layers, being a Russian American, newly American, I've been just naturalized recently, coming from a country that is not very affected yet by climate change. And what you have seen just recently, right, in Madrid, that historic snowfall that you had, is something that is not, directly impacted perhaps by climate change. It's not like a straightforward manifestation of climate change, but yet climate change is sort of this underlying issue that's affecting everything these days. And this is what I'm trying to address with this work, FloodZone. It is a much wider scope of issues, of course, than directly flooding.
Yes, indeed. In fact, yeah, that it's well. Let's see. Let's go into the exhibition, if we may, and because I have also a lot of questions. So we have a lot to talk about the situation we are living right now, and through your exhibition, because climate change has been at the center of your investigations in the past years. And so I would like to start. First of all, you are based in Miami. And the first piece that welcomed the visitors in the space, it's titled Park Avenue. So tell us about this series FloodZone, and especially about this work.
Yes, absolutely. As you can see right there, this wouldn't be necessarily an illustration of climate change as you would expect it, right? Or something that's associated with the title, FloodZone. And the project is really based on these kinds of metaphors, on these allegories as to what it feels like to live with this change in climate. And most importantly, what those forces are behind where we are with climate change right now, right? So what are those economic forces, what are political forces that are underneath the issue itself, right? Climate change is just the tip of the iceberg. So Park Avenue, Park Avenue is a famous street in New York City, and then there's a much smaller version of that in Miami Beach. And this is one of the historic hotels, Art Deco hotels, that is under renovation, and it has been in that state for the past 3 years. So what you see in the background is actually a printed billboard that's obstructing an unsightly construction site. There's a giant pole, one of the electrical poles, and then our famous pink sidewalk that permeates the entire island of Miami Beach. So it's a bit of a meta. It's a sort of, to borrow from one of my favorite photographers, Luigi Ghiri, it's a cardboard landscape, so to speak, right? So you have stock people that are kind of populating that environment within the image, and then my image that is sort of disrupting this trompe-l'oeil of like this printed, perfected version of Miami Beach. Does that answer the question, Sabrina? I don't want to take up too much time on each singular piece. But the motif of this sort of like fake reality, it's a bit of a theatrical set, is sort of a thread throughout this project. So it's a lot more, it has a lot more to do with this kind of layering of constructed and actual reality of this place. And by this place, I mean Miami Beach. Of course, the project covers a much wider territory now. But at this point, this is sort of a representation of what I'm trying to say with the rest of the project. This kind of tourist and developers' exploitation of coastal areas and what it leads to in terms of the environment. Okay, we can move on, I guess, to the next one. Right? Yeah, so going down the stairs, we have one of the key images there. Oh, we're having some technical issues here. It's just me. I'll just keep talking. All right, here we go. The gator. The gator right there up as a frameless metal print, sort of suspended. I really like how it's placed, kind of hanging up in the air. The silhouette of the gator I came really close to it. It's behind glass. There are all these scratches on glass. It's on Watson Island, not too far from Miami Beach. At the time, I was reading some science fiction, J.G. Ballard, and The Drowned World, and a motif in the novel are those oversized reptiles. The other day, my 10-year-old son told me, "Of course, Mom, we're facing extinction as a species, but the Earth will survive, and these iguanas that we see all over Miami are just going to grow in size." So the gator is sort of an easy shot, but it's representative of the magnificence of the issue, I thought. And so it's actually used for the cover of my book that was published in 2019. So here it is, just the second half of it.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry, because I had a sound problem. I couldn't hear you, but I just had the glimpse of the end. In fact, it's very interesting because Gator, it's and I mean in the FloodZone series, there is very little presence of life in the sense of fauna. And in this exhibition, we will see, we just have, in fact, I think, 2 photographs where we have the animal presence into the exhibition. And I feel it's very much something very much linked with all the subjects that you are diving in of climate change and its consequences.
Yes, absolutely, you're right. Throughout the book, which is an extended version of FloodZone, there are over 80 photographs there, 89 to be precise, flora and fauna coexist along with humans, but fauna, especially the animals, are sort of emphasized in their scale and in their presence. And again, this is an allegory for those animals inhabiting the earth after us, after we go extinct with what we're doing now with the environment. On the left, you see the diptych between these two, camouflage and roots, and they tend to be presented together all the time. They were first put together on the spread of the book, of the FloodZone book. So camouflage on the left is this giant printed banner, there's no intervention on my behalf into the scene, that's covering unsightly background, this chain link fence, it's at a park. And then on the right, you see the old palm trees sort of bracing for life onto this rock and eroded soil.
Well, it's a very intriguing picture, in fact, roots. And I always wondered how come this tree came over this. It looks like concrete, in fact. I don't know if you can confirm that.
Yeah. So it's an older palm tree, and I don't know if it grew into that block of concrete or just rock. It looks like limestone to me, possibly. And then, of course, the soil got eroded further, and then it accomplishes this sort of prominent verticality, and it's also symbolic of this perseverance amidst the rising sea level.
Yeah, and it makes a perfect, in fact, with the other photograph that we are viewing, because we cannot not talk about the exploitation of resources and how we have been. We live in a model in which we are building over, and in a way that we are really invading nature.
Yes, and the pairing communicates just that, this sort of printed version of nature is gradually replacing the actual thing that is barely surviving and sort of waiting for us to leave is my feeling. And so pairing them together, the kind of messages that emerge from pairs of images and spreads as opposed to singular ones. So this became a sort of a diptych.
Let's go through the next photograph, which is also for me very enigmatic and frighteningly, I don't know, scarily poetic in a way. The aesthetic of it is so beautiful. So I don't know, maybe we will get closer so we can see the details of this photograph, which are stairs. Can you describe it to us?
Oh, yes. And this was a surprise for me. I think this was my first encounter with sunny day flooding, is a term for unusually high tide, or king tide, they're called. And this is in Hollywood, Florida, which is just north of Miami. And I thought it was a perfect city, for that, because the whole scene looked to me quite cinematic. It's something almost out of, science fiction or some Hollywood movie. And it reminded me immediately of the Truman Show, that indie movie with Jim Carrey, where he descends the staircase. So this kind of pastel pink and the perfect reflection in salt water. So this is, not a storm or anything. It's not just a puddle. I'm standing almost knee deep in water, and the entire street is flooded. And yet this sort of perfect shade of, marshmallow pink and the staircase implies some sort of movement of humans. So yeah, all these layers together in this one fairly minimal shot.
So let's pursue into the exhibition, and there is this the last part of the exhibition, which is in fact I think what the visitors most like and are surprised of. So tell us about this.
Continuing the Hollywood theme, this here is called The Masts, and it's not even a black and white image. It's actually in color. That's how monochromatic it was. It's very early in the morning on the west coast of Florida, and the birds were getting really loud. It's a very thick fog, and I'm standing there by myself, and immediately the scene reminded me of Hitchcock's movie, The Birds, right? And the theme of nature and culture, and sort of nature potentially taking over at any minute. Um, we feel like we are in control of the situation, but as this year shows, especially, we really aren't, right? So this feeling that it's a serene and tranquil scene, but perhaps the humans are no longer present.
Yeah, it has a very scary feel, in fact, into that.
Yeah, and there's always this interplay of motifs, and emotions. Sort of what I'm really trying to address with this project is not necessarily, environmentalism and eco kind of photography or directly climate change even. It's more about the psychological state. There's a theorist called Timothy Morton who coined the term hyperobject in terms of climate change. That is something that's so big, close to sublime, right? Overwhelming for us to accept as a present phenomenon, right? Something that we live alongside with. We're a bit in denial of that. Vizcaya, the next image, is this Venetian-styled estate. It's one of the oldest properties, and it's incredibly beautiful, well-built construction from 1910s in Miami. And what you're seeing there is flooding due to, again, one of those king tides. So, the question, again, throughout this project is, what's worth preserving, right? And what could be lost if we continue at this pace?
Well, I mean, at the beginning of this walkthrough, you were talking about what we have been living in Madrid. In fact, for example, with the huge snowstorm we had. I mean, Madrid is literally a city where we are not used to have snowstorms. It never happens, and we got 1 meter high of snow during a week, and I mean, we talked about that last week when we were preparing this conversation, and I told you, it's funny because 1 year ago, as you might remember, we were in a conversation, you and me, with other artists and curators, and I asked you, I addressed you the question literally about climate change, and if you felt that literally it is. Something that everybody is sensitive about and got an understanding. And I put myself in the position of saying it feels so far away from where I stand. And it was the beginning of the pandemic, of the situation we are living. And I mean, in April, 1 year ago, I was not even considering that the current situation and health crisis that we are living might be a consequence of all our way of living on Earth. So I wonder always if you feel that your work is reaching its purpose in a way, in sensibilizing or sensitivizing people. And also my second question is, do you feel an activist?
Well, I'm first and foremost an artist, I think. I don't know if I could consider myself an environmentalist. I guess so, because those images have, some of my images have directly contributed to the cause, right? So there have been some fundraisers throughout this year, and so there's this tangible outcome to those images, physically, right, or financially contributing to the cause of environmentalism. Of course, I care, but I'm an everyday person. I was an artist always. As an artist, I was always dealing with environmental issues from different perspectives, perhaps. I focused on environmental design when I was studying in Russia, and then industrial agriculture when I was getting my graduate degree in the United States. So it was always my interest. from, I guess, various angles with this observational photography, which is quite new for me. It's only been about 4 years of this sort of deviation from my usual studio practice. I feel like it was Miami, the move to this extreme. I'm living on this climatic edge of climate change. But the thing is, this is just the beginning, right, for the rest of the world. So what we're seeing in these hotspots will reach everybody else. We are just at the forefront of it. And, Miami Beach is one of those ground zeros for measuring climate change. So this is why observational, this sort of lyric documentary kind of photography felt like the perfect medium to channel all these thoughts and feelings, and this anxiety that I was feeling about the issue. I arrived here, still using the term global warming, and now we know it's actually global heating, right? And climate change has only been used in the past few years. And yet we are experiencing it here firsthand. Hence the choice of this medium. I think I would be still working in the studio had it not been for this move to Miami. And, it's been 4 years now and 3 hurricanes since I lived here, and the impacts of those hurricanes and seeing what else is happening around the world, tracking certain issues. I know back in Russia, which is my homeland, right, we have permafrost melting. So, yeah.
Well, tell us a little more about the piece that we are viewing now.
This is one of those allegories, like most of my images. It's this man standing on the hull of a ship in Miami River. It's the silhouette, and sort of he's descending into shadow. Only his hands are visible, so it's a worker on the ship. And it was taken from a boat while we were actually filming a documentary about this body of work when I was at an artist residency here in Miami Beach. So it's it's a local, and it's on the water.
Well, it's as you said. I mean, it's the climate change is something very silent that it's really hard to see it. And what really seduces me in your work is that it's beautiful, and that there is not it's not noisy, it's not provocative and alarmist. And I feel it translates very well the situation. And I see also the reaction of the visitors, that they literally get surprised by each photograph and the conversation when they are visiting the show. I mean, I'm not talking about professional, like literally any kind of visitor and any age. Your work starts a conversation. And for me, it's something very powerful with art, the ability to start a conversation. And when a conversation starts, well, it's not half win, but it's a good way to go, to go to somewhere more positive. Okay, so let's go see the.
I'm so glad to hear that, Sabrina, especially for somebody who is not speaking native language, right? Moving here to the United States, there was always language gap. I don't know when it will evaporate, but this desire, right, this instinct to communicate through visual form is, of course, what propelled me to take on art and photography in the first place. With photography, especially because it's such an accessible medium, right? It can communicate very complex ideas in a single frame across cultures. So that's what drew me to observational photography, especially, and the idea that an image can be layered and can call for free association rather than some sort of didactic singular image, right? None of these images are linear depictions of climate change. They're meant to be seductive, like photography always has been. And in a way, it's a bit of a meta, because it also addresses this medium specific quality, you know, to kind of allure, right, and seduce the viewer into usually some sort of commercial interaction, right? Photography was invented to advertise things, including land and real estate, right? And promote tourism in certain areas. So it's all part of it. And the choice of photography is very conscientious.
So on this part of the exhibition, we have 3 pieces that are very enigmatic. I mean, in the sense that I think like each visitor thinks you do collage. Each visitor thinks that they are viewing a photo collage especially with the right and the left picture that are on the wall. So I would like to start with the Venus, and even for me it's very complex, and I don't know if with the online visit we can transmit the technique and the eye that you apply on your photographs. You don't do collage at all, and you really work on a situation.
Yeah, not in this project. You know, there are, historically, I have been making tableaus, so 3-dimensional collages, well, sets, tableaus that I would rephotograph in the project called Landscape Sublime, which address similar issues, but in a different, field. And then with Miami, it seemed already like this life-scale collage to me. And most of the coastal areas, you know, tourist areas in the United States on which the project is focused, of course, I'm constantly expanding the territory, you know, as much as I can now with the restrictions. But the Venus, for instance, you know, this goddess of fertility and beauty, and yet this picture was taken at a design district in Miami. It's a giant outdoor mall. This one in the middle is fallen palm trees after a hurricane. And again, the pink sidewalk of Miami Beach, and this very sort of luxurious, quickly developing area in Miami Beach, which is a very low-lying island. It's only about 4 feet above the water. Right. And the next image on the right is, again, there's no direct intervention on my behalf. It is as it is. And so this was taken while I was still only exploring. I think it's early 2017, and I didn't have any preconceived agenda of what I'm going to photograph out in the streets. I was actually gathering material for possible paintings. And I noticed the abundance of these images of this sort of perfected, idealized world that is being presumably, you know, constructed all around, while this particular building is actually still in the same state. So oftentimes in the cracks of those, you know, beautifully printed billboards, you see flooded foundations and all kinds of other issues going on, you know, with these construction sites that have to combat so much, you know, so many obstacles, you know, building in this climate. And of course, initially, the entire Florida was built quickly and cheaply.
Well, there is something of the promised future and the dream. And in that aspect, it's true that some of the photographs really address this idea of the strategy and the denial that you've been talking about. And I feel that especially these pictures and this series many of them addresses that, and how we construct urbanity around this idea of a perfect world.
Right, and especially now, looking at as many images of the world as we experience the world itself, right? You start questioning, you know, what's that exposure to so much imagery doing to your perception of the world, right? It's always a bit filtered. There's this kind of parallel imagined world happening at any given moment in our mind, in our collective memory, right? There's this overlap with images that we've seen, and that because there are so many and often of the same kind, right? This idealized image, we kind of remember it, as such. And photography tends to preserve whatever it photographs in the same state, right? So we still think that this sort of exists, right? That version of the world exists, and it might no longer be there, and it's shifting very quickly. But that's something we don't get to see.
Yeah, that's true. So let's go to the last image of the show. Which is again, I mean, it seems so surreal, and I have to say that it took me time to decipher each one of the images of the show, and even after reviewing them, it's really when I spend time with them that I really understand and realize the subject you're really addressing. I mean, really not realize, but you're really understanding it.
Yeah, this one, I would say, I'm glad this is the last one, sort of the punctum that concludes the show. This is the most representative of climate change. Interestingly, these domes belong to a single house that was built initially entirely on land, right, on the west coast of Florida. It was on land, about 700 feet setback from the water, right, from the water's edge. So what you're seeing now is that direct representation of sea level rise and land erosion due to several hurricanes. So this, ironically, this was built by this oil magnate from Midwest, American Midwest, as a vacation home. So he dreamed it up and built it. There were 6 domes initially. 2 are now entirely in water. And this was built actually very recently. It was only built in the 80s. First when I visited the site, and now it's only accessible by boat. So I'm taking this photo from, a wobbly boat. So this is a shot 1 out of, 1,000 when I could get it actually right and not blurry. Yeah, so this was built in the 80s, and sea level rise, hurricanes, beach erosion led to it being entirely in the water, formerly luxurious and sort of fantasy-like. And to me, it looked quite surreal. Actually, the entire, throughout the entire project, you can see the elements of surrealism. Again, sort of channeling my feelings about the issue. But interestingly, now these domes provide habitat for all those sea creatures and migratory birds. So it became, in a way, more beneficial to a much wider range of inhabitants than this oil magnate, oil millionaire who built it initially.
Well, there is a saying that says that nature always find or rediscover its place, or always reconquer in the end. So that's an interesting anecdote about this photograph. I would like to show and share, and maybe you can talk about this beautiful book that we have.
Yes, this is a work of 4 years, FloodZone. So what you're seeing at the gallery is a selection of prints from this book. It was published by Steidl in 2019, and it is available at the gallery. So it's 89 photographs taken in Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Georgia. So coastal states in the south of the United States, on my many trips throughout the years. The project is actually ongoing, and it's going to morph into this other body of work, Florida and Atlantic coast. So I'm traveling up the coast, and I'm constantly adding to this project. But yeah, so FloodZone, yeah. That is the book. Oh, it's actually, I need to mention that it was edited, and the essay was contributed by David Campany, a great British and now New York City-based author and writer and curator and critic. So check it out for that reason too. The editing was very much collaborative. So the sequence was constructed by David Campany, and I only contributed the pictures. It's a really interesting narrative that's shaped by the sequence. Okay, I think, are we continuing to have sound problems?
Don't hear me, right? Yes, you hear me. Sorry about that. So FloodZone have been exhibited extensively, I would say. So it's never enough. Though it's never enough, but it has been exhibited extensively in museums. So I would like to ask you about, do you feel, I mean, that museums have been, or the art community in general has been more receptive to the subject of climate change, and do you feel that more can be done? I mean, I would like to have your insight on that.
Yes, absolutely. It's really heartening to see this work and other climate-related projects getting great exposure and coverage, especially in Europe, is what I'm seeing. In the United States, I've had my first museum solo last year at the USF Contemporary Art Museum in Tampa. So this was the start, and I'm about to have 3 more museum exhibitions this year with this project, which is, it's incredible, and it's going to be all throughout the United States. Well, actually, mainly on the East Coast. And then in Europe, currently it's exhibited at the Kunsthaus in Vienna in a big group show on climate change. And there's a very active initiative to cover this issue annually by the museum. So it calls itself a Green Museum, which is incredible to see. And I think, of course, you know, our attention is currency in a way, and the more attention the issue receives without becoming formulaic and exhaustive, I think the better it is in the long run. What this work, I hope, accomplishes is for people to do their own further research, as opposed to, you know, provide easy answers, quick and cliched and generic, right? That is not what I was interested in at all. I am not very keen on photojournalistic drama, you know, all these epic sort of disaster moments, because to me, psychologically, they imply quick resolutions, right? So
Yeah.
what I wanted to show with FloodZone, and again, flood here is as much sort of mythological as it is factual, real moment flood, is to show the complexity of the issue and also its presence in our everyday lives. And that's what I'm after. I'm looking for the surreal and there's sort of the signifiers of climate change in everyday life without being, you know, the typical Russian fatalist about it, right?
Yeah.
So it might be interpreted as alarmist, which I'm fine with, but I'm not fatalist. I'm not entirely pessimistic about it. I hope we can stir up action, right, and all join in, and realizing, especially this year, how things like that affect everybody, absolutely everybody. But they will affect, as usual, the underprivileged more than anybody else, right? People who won't be able to afford to move on a whim, right, to relegate. So they need to be better prepared to adapt to the issue. And by adapting, it's usually going to be migration.
Are you contacted and are you involved with schools or university? I mean, do you have the chance to be in contact with your work or through your work with younger generation that mine and yours? And I'm curious to know how they react and how they address this issue.
Interestingly, they are quite versed, and I get asked to give talks all the time. I'm again a visual person. If the subject is, specifically climate change and not my work as an artist, then I prefer to be in dialogue with specialists, right? With an environmentalist, with a scientist. So I get asked to be on podcasts and radio and give talks all the time. Interestingly, the younger generation, what is it, Gen Z, I guess, Gen X, I'm lost.
I don't know.
They are quite versed. My 10-year-old knows for a fact that he won't be living in Miami Beach in the next, 2 decades. That would be the time to move, right? Things will be
Yeah.
changing. They are aware. Yeah, but the problem is, of course, they're going to have to deal with the bulk of it.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if you hear me. That's interesting enough. Maybe we have already some questions. I mean, or if not, we're gonna open it in not that much. So while if you have questions and or comments that you want to share with us, with Anastasia, please do not hesitate. Drop it in Facebook or YouTube. In the meantime, I would like to ask you, Anastasia, maybe just to go out a little of the climate change subject. And I would like to ask you, how have you lived and adjusted as an artist? And how will you, I mean, is your practice have been affected or not affected, but changed by the current situation? And what do you think will be the future or the next steps for you as an artist?
Oh, big questions, right, Sabrina? There was a lot
I
of
know.
reevaluating of my priorities. Certainly, um, it was a bit contradictory having to travel so much while addressing climate change. Of course, we know transportation is a big contributor to the issue. So being aware of that, and yet, again, the whole debate about electric cars and where they get that energy. I will try to avoid the subject, but it's scaling down on travel has been hard, but at the same time beneficial to the environment, as we see. As an artist, interestingly, this year is shaping up to be probably the busiest of my life, with 7 exhibitions, including 4 institutional shows, possibly 8. Yeah, and all over the world. So it's great to see this project getting so much interest. And of course, my goals with that is always the dialogue, right? The kind of conversations it opens up, because it's not sort of terrifying, right? And dark. There are elements of darkness and surrealism, but it's not pessimistic. Neither it is very, dictatorial in its interpretation. It was able to attract a very wide audience, including people that are not necessarily or weren't initially even interested in the subject, but the ability to inspire them to ask those questions is the most valuable for me. As artists, we often find ourselves sort of preaching to the choir, to those who are already initiated and are in the know. of the issues we're addressing. You find your, circle. But then with FloodZone, I tried to push beyond that little bubble, so to speak, and really, really open it up. And that's why, this project is showing Europe, right, in Madrid and in the Netherlands, and it will be shown in Russia. I just found out in the spring in the Biennale, and it was shown in Germany last year. And of course, in the United States, it will be shown in Virginia and again in Florida and then in Philadelphia. So I'm so curious about the response each time. And so far it's been, because I'm not feeding anybody any answers, it's mainly been questions from people and questions to themselves as well. What am I doing and how am I contributing and what can be done and can anything be done? But the project is not doom and gloom. If anything, it's sort of addressing the things that are worth preserving. Yeah.
Well, that's quite a nice note. Let's see if we have some questions by the audience. Sorry, let's see. Okay, so we have a question from someone. Do you believe there is a real solution for climate change?
I do, actually. That is a great question.
That's a difficult one.
It's a difficult one, and I do believe there is a solution for climate change. There is a solution. It probably won't happen in our lifetime. We won't. It can't, right? It's going to take 100 years, over 100 years to reverse what we've done. Not to reverse, to just sort of halt the progress of the consequences of how we've been operating, right? And then it's going to take many more decades to reverse the effects, right? But again, I'm not an expert. My favorite literature on the subject, I have the whole list, and probably a good place to start would be Uninhabitable Earth. Just try not to read it before bedtime. I've had very crazy dreams with that one, but that's a good start, I think.
Great. Do we have another question? Let's see. How do you feel about living in Miami, bearing in mind this situation?
Very uncertain, and actually, the project, as detached and neutral as most of these images might appear, they are all incredibly personal for me, because a lot of them are from Miami and Miami Beach, and these are, this is my first 4 years living here and constantly questioning how long-term this is. How can I stay in the place? So I chose the city for many great things it has to offer, but at the same time finding out all these issues. And the other day I met somebody who just got a place not too far from here. A lot of New Yorkers. Florida, ironically, is, I think, now second state for inward migration, if not first. It fluctuates, but during the pandemic, there's been a huge wave of migration into Florida because, warmer climes and other benefits. But at the same time, that we have floods this morning. I have friends texting me knowing that I do this project. I have friends almost every week texting me locations of floods now, sort of volunteering those places. So I know now I'm a lot more familiar with the lay of the land, right? I know when to park my car on an elevated ground. I live in a building that is in the flood zone. The entire Miami Beach is a red flood zone, right? So yeah, it's precarious, and the project deals with climate anxiety more than with anything else. It's sort of a psychological portrait.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I don't know if we have another question from the audience. Let's see if any pop in. Yes, we do. For how long do you travel or move to capture these images? That's a very nice question, because one of the question that most is done to us in the space by the visitors, it's if it's just one single hurricane, or is it, I mean, it's about how long does it take, and how, if you've been traveling a lot for that.
It takes very, very, very long time. And this was new for me as, again, as a studio photographer and studio artist. Prior to that, I knew that, you know, when I come to the studio, by the end of the week, I will have some progress. You know, in 2 weeks, I would usually have an artwork. And I work relatively fast with my tableaus and even with paintings. But then with observational photography, it was incredibly frustrating at first, but I sort of persevered to challenge myself. This was also the time I felt like I needed to push myself into this new realm. It's very hard, and the success ratio of the images that I actually get to keep is very, very low. So it's the art of reduction, right? In this cluttered world, you have to frame it. And that's why the biggest pet peeve, right, the biggest frustration is when somebody crops your image, because all I have is the framing, right? It's all about the subject framed right. And my tools, right, even in photography, are quite minimal. There are barely any dramatic shadows. It's very sort of straightforward, deadpan perspective on the subject. So it's not as much driving. I started, you know, I know my locations, so I map out my locations now. A lot of it is Miami and walking. And then I would dispatch, right? I would drive to the place, and I have my bicycle with me, and then I would ride around if it's a big circle. But usually the best works are, you know, the best images are found in between locations. Interestingly, you know, when I'm walking in between places that I mapped out, I find the best and most interesting and most telling things. So it's a lot of walking. It's been 4 years, and I'm photographing every week, almost every week. So every other day of the week, especially in the first few years. And sometimes one day we'll produce 2 images, and sometimes a whole month there's nothing.
Well, it's quite already an intense rhythm, considering what are your subjects. So it's scary. Well, we don't have. Well, I think my video is not working. I don't know if you hear me. We don't have more questions, but we do have some very kind comments saying that what a great body of works, congrats, and a lot of thank you for your practice. Very interesting body of works. Well, I think we can put we can come to an end. I mean, there is usually I always have conclusion for the conversation, but with this subject, I feel there is no perfect conclusion I can give or I can share. What I can say is first of all, thank you, Anastasia, for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. You know, if there's one thing I could say with this photography, is that I think what made this work relatable is that photography is, yes, it is art, right? To me, it was art. It was a choice of the medium, but it's also always a record, you know? So just a decade in the future, we might look at these images in a very different way. And some of these places may no longer exist. And that was the whole point.
Well, it's a nice point, and I would like to thank you also very much for this beautiful body of work, even if it was already said. So thank you for that, and thank you for this amazing exhibition. For the viewers, visitors, the people that lives in Madrid, please do not hesitate. You can visit it until the 3rd of April. If you are not in Madrid, you can also visit it online in 3D. And please do get the FloodZone book. It's really beautiful. It's you can get it online. I mean, just type FloodZone and on our eShop if you want. But it's really a book that is beyond what you can expect when you see this show. It's really very impressive. So thank you very much, Anastasia, and see you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye.